Donc, nous avons vu que le secteur...
We heard that agriculture is experiencing a deep mutation. We are even talking about a third agricultural revolution. It is also at the core of the biggest challenges of our century: climate crisis, food sovereignty, scarcity of natural resources and renewable resources. So agriculture on its own is part of 12 of the 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals as defined by the UN. And the aim of this roundtable: what are the challenges for AgriTech research and its application in Belgium, in France, but also in Europe. So welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. We have Philippe Jacques, Vice Dean Research at the Gembloux Agro-Bio Tech faculty and Director of the Bio-Agro Cross-Border Joint Research Unit. Claire Rogel Gaillard is also among us, Deputy Scientific Director Agriculture in RAE. Welcome among us. Hilde Willekens, please excuse my pronunciation, Head of Strategic Research Relations, Ghent University. Welcome. Alexandre Ternier, Professor, University of Rennes 1, co-author of the white paper, Agriculture and Digital. Erwan Persson, Senior Lecturer and Researcher in RAE, and Jacques Wéry, Director of Research, Strategy and Partnerships, Institut Agro. Good morning, Jacques. My first question is fairly simple, however deeply meaningful. What is your vision when it comes to today's innovations and the future of agriculture? What are the challenges and how are they also priorities in your respective sectors? So let's start with Claire, maybe. Let's take a look at your PowerPoint presentation. Good morning to you all. It is an honor to be among you to talk about AgriTech and to share our research agendas. This is not my presentation, so should I just move forward until I find mine? We were told to prepare some slides, and I came prepared. Oh, I apologize. We will just start with Philippe, as was foreseen in our schedule. I wanted to be a gentleman, but... So to answer the question, I would like to present to you an original structure that was created in Belgium and France in January 2020. It's a cross-border structure, and it is quite unique because its aim is to develop a reference center for biochemical engineering and apply it to agro-food and biotechnologies, among others. And on this slide, you can see all the joint research units that exist inside the INRAE. And it is a unique sector structure because you have researchers living in Belgium and working in Belgium and also in France. So from Liège, from Hauts-de-France, and so on. So why bio-eco-agro? Because we can find a number of keywords that we have been developing in our structure and that are linked to the future of agriculture and agro-food. Biocontrol, bioprocesses, biopreservations, biomolecules, bioeconomy, biotechnology, ecosystems, eco-friendly processes, agronomy. We could have added agroecology, agro-food, and agro-resources. I will not monopolize the floor too long, but I would like to briefly touch upon the organization of our structure and try to explain why it might be a model for the future of agriculture and agro-food. We divided the researchers in 3 clusters. The first one is more linked to the future development, so agroecology in the context of climate change. You can find research from INRAE, from Gembloux, and they are working on the development of agroecology, taking into account the digital technologies and innovation. Then a second part, applications of agriculture, maybe not only in agro-food, but more about the research of new biomolecules that can be extracted from plants or from microorganisms, among which some of those are found in soil. And so we are getting away from agro-food, but we are finding them back in new agro-pesticides, for example. And then we have a third cluster, which is linked to food and feed and the One Health concept. So we have three clusters and main keywords. We call them cross-cutting concepts. So we have research groups in every clusters, and we decided to create maybe something like think tanks, so locations which are ideas labs, and we try to create new approaches using several types of skills and several types of competencies and disciplines. And so this is what you find in those green arrows, so biocontrol, valorization of agro-resources, bioprocesses, and biopreservation. And maybe let me briefly talk about the example of biocontrol. In Wallonia, we are responsible for a strategic innovation approach, and for our region, in the last month, they created this initiative to try to identify those sectors relevant for the future and that needed to innovate. And they are part of a project DG Biocontrol, it is called. And the objective is to bring together people working in the digital world and the people developing new pesticides and new biocontrol agents. So it's smart farming, but very targeted, whose aim is to make sure that we can rethink biopesticides, and we have biopesticides that are being developed today. They haven't experienced an economic development yet, and we want to use the digital approach to support the marketization of those. And so we need to monitor the diseases happening in the field using sensors, for example, that will detect the presence of fungi, spores responsible for a particular disease. And we want to use tools at the right time, at the right place, and that will be able to distribute the right pesticide. And so this targeted use will limit the amount of pesticides used in a field, and that's a big advantage because, of course, the cost of production of those biopesticides is much higher than the synthesis pesticides. And so knowing when to distribute them, when to spread them, and in which quantity is economically sensible. And then there are, of course, another aspects, and we need to develop all those products, and this needs to be developed thanks to processes, and those processes are energy, are consuming a lot of energy, and thanks to the digital technologies, we could also reduce this energy consumption. So this is just to give you an example of a unique structure which is carrying this agriculture for the future. There are many other examples, but we can talk about those later. Thank you very much, Philippe. Let's finally give the floor to Claire. What do you think are the priority research points in the AgriTech sector, and what type of partnerships should we promote? I would like, first of all, to remind you that the INRAE is the National Institute for Agriculture, Environment, and Research. So let's not forget that. So it's a research public institution, and they want to find concrete applications of the research. So I would like to present to you the various priorities in our research in the context of AgriTech, and we already talked about it. We have a lot of issues to solve today, and all those issues are interlinked, and we are all affected by them. And I presented to you this drawing, Safe and Just Operating Space, on the right. And those are about the planetary boundaries. And we've already destroyed some of those boundaries. We went way beyond. They are the climate crisis, the phosphorus and nitrogen flows, the soil transformation, soil use, biodiversity loss. And we need to talk about this invisible biodiversity, the microorganisms in the soil, for example. This biodiversity was for a very long time neglected and forgotten. And those planetary boundaries we need to safeguard them. And next to that, we also want the boundaries to preserve equality and fairness. So we need to create an agricultural system, and we really want to preserve the social and economic boundaries. So we need to keep our systems safe and just. And so we need a research agenda together with all the stakeholders. We are going to talk about the climate change, about the biodiversity, about nutrients. And we are facing a lot of transitions happening and needed at the same time. We need to transition in the context of the climate change. We need to reduce our impact on the climate. There is the one of agriculture, and there is, of course, the dietary transitions, which have been mentioned. And beyond just eating more plants, we need to look at what is inside proteins. So in amino acids, what is there? It is not that easy to replace animal protein by vegetal protein. So there is those amino acids that are needed, and we need to look at the impact of the dietary transition on the nature and on the human health. And then about the future farmers' generation, we can see that the situation is different depending on the countries. So some countries are having agriculture without farmers. So this career path is also evolving, and we need to take the transformations into account. So I would say that today, despite all those difficulties, we have a shared agenda. We have the EU Green Deal today, gives us a shared agenda for the transitions. And today we will hear how Belgium and France are acting. Very briefly, maybe a certain number of expectations carried by INRAE and supported by the INRAE. If we look at the link between transition, the digital, the agroecology ambitions, we need to work on anticipation and predictions better. So if we want to be more parsimonious on the use of inputs or several drugs, we need to better anticipate. If we can see that there is a behavioral change in an animal, that animal needs to be treated soon enough so as to avoid the use of antibiotics. And then digital sobriety is another aspect. We are not here to say everything needs to be digital, whatever the environmental cost of it. And so we need to show some sobriety in how we implement digital solutions. That is an ambition for INRAE. And then open science and open data approach. We know that we need to produce data, metrics are needed. We need to collect parameters. And but we need to guarantee access to those data. And we also need to be able to produce data useful to help the policy and decision makers. We want to reduce the load of work. We can see that the farmer work needs to remain attractive, and we want to improve practices and agroecology decision making. We also talked about INRAE and France 2030 plan. We want to work on strategies when it comes to sustainable agriculture and contribution or help for new equipments helping the environmental transition. There are priority research programs, PEPR, PEPR, and we are using those various innovations carried by INRAE and INREA. And we want to combine the digital, robotics, but also genetic research so as to make this transition happen and better adapt ourselves to climate change. And we can use several leverages together so as to promote this agroecological transition. There is another PEPR when it comes to advanced vegetal selection, so genome edition, for example, and this PEPR is going to work on gene modification of plants to combine traditional OGMs with new technologies. And another priority research, cultivate and protect in a different way, so growing and protecting crops differently. So this is happening upstream of the agriculture, but we want to create links with innovation, and next to that, a lot of challenges on agricultural robotics and biocontrol and biostimulants. So we have a whole panel of research actions linked to innovation, to the stakeholders, and this is linked to the whole chain of value. And then finally, a few words on partnerships. We are very aware of the importance of interdisciplinarity. We also need original consortia, so joining public and private stakeholders, sharing infrastructures. And another thing we support strongly are the living labs, because they allow us to co-design objectives and associate all the beneficiaries, direct and indirect, from the start. And we are also involved in the public policies, for example, the ARPA project, whose aim is to contribute to the verification of the safety of new robotic technologies being created. And then finally, data sharing is another partnership approach. So we need to share more data, and this is part of a collective awareness raising. So we need to establish partnerships. And our objective is really to be at the service of all the stakeholders. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Alde. Bonjour. Alde, du coup, très intéressant.
Hilde, yeah, that was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing the Belgian perspective. So same question as Claire. What are the top priorities in AgriTech research, and what are the stakes and challenges?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I will start with the challenges, I will shortly introduce my university first. So Ghent University is one of the larger universities. We have nearly 50,000 students. And these students are not only local students, but we have around 6,000 international students. So our policy has been already for quite some years to attract international students in different ways, to make it a more vibrant community, to collect views and learnings from all over the world. So that's why we also have, we are changing lots of our programs to English, from the 200 programs, we have now around 75 English taught master programs. Secondly, one of our visions is that we want to communicate and do research all over the world. So we opened an international campus in Korea, and this hub is growing every year and looking towards the Asian communities. We listened already to a lot of esteemed speakers, and I heard a lot about technical challenges. We learned about sustainability, data management, regulatory and policy frames, but also consumer acceptance, market demand, and of course farmer education and training. So I'm not going to repeat all this, so I'm going to address my challenges a little bit different. I think the first challenge that I want to put on the table is that we have to find each other. It's really important in this international community and also from our Ghent University vision that we work together. So not only because we want to bring our technical innovations to the market, but also because we have to find international funding, so we cannot do without that. So I asked for my EU colleagues to make an overview of the running collaborations with France. And you will hear later about our EU team from my colleague Sylvia Bursens, who will speak in a workshop this afternoon. They provided me with a list of no less than 65 collaborations with different French organizations. I must say I was very happy to hear that because it shows already that we are doing good. We are collaborating. We are collaborating in an international way, and we seem to find each other, certainly in the areas of the circular bioeconomy, fertilizers, sustainability and biodiversity, also multi-actor work. We are together in several projects, animal health and welfare, we should not forget about that, and the whole agri-food chain. The question is, of course, can we still do better? Do we keep on looking to the same partners, or do we want to extend our collaborations and partnerships? So our analysts looked also in gaps, in expertises in which we and French organizations are already working and already publicizing in an academic way. And so very soon we saw already that there were two areas: molecular biology of plants and pests, and issues related to Africa like drought, climate and food security. So I think personally this could be a very easy win-win opportunity for the near future. We know that we are doing very good, high-quality work there on both sides. If we bring this together, then I think we can very quickly move up and step up and be innovative in these areas as well. On the faint picture in the background, you can have a look at our climate flux tower that we built in the Congo Basin. I'm sure probably most people didn't know about that, but we are effectively looking for more collaborations. And this climate flux tower is very important there because it will help us to build more resilient agri-food chains in Africa. And I think this is the way how we look, fits again into our future and our vision. We also need to get to know each other's strengths. I think this is very important. Which organization can we can we rely on? Can we work together on the future? So I'm taking again this opportunity to introduce a number of our core facilities which are related to agriculture, but do not have to be 100% in that sector. So how does it work? Our core facilities are actually a hub of experts, of infrastructure, but they're also learning centers. So, for example, if you look to the light microscopy, for example, not everybody can be an expert in microscopy, but you would maybe like to do it. Maybe it will give you some more information on the project, on the challenge that you are taking. So in this core facility, you find experts who will help you to set up your project, who will help you to design your experiments, and who will guide you through the process, or maybe, if it's very complex, do it also for you. So you will find experts, you find infrastructure, but these core facilities are also a service towards external partners who may be in a need for a certain expertise and who would like to work with us. So these core facilities are also service providers. The third challenge that I want to put on the table is that we need to have investors in innovation. Why is this important? Because as researchers and developers at universities, we work towards the lower TRL levels. So, but if you want to bring an innovation on the market, you need to do a lot of testing, and and that's of course tremendously expensive. So the investors are coming in for the financial experts, but not only for that. They can bring in much more because they know the markets, they know the business, they have networks we do not have, so they can bring in much more than only the financial aspects. So if I think about innovations that we are developing today at our university, then I think, for example, at biostimulants. Biostimulants are products which have the potential to replace a number of chemical products which are there for plant health protection. Another example is precision farming. So can be the development of agricultural robots, which can be self-driving, but I don't think that this is the most important aspect. But they can also determine exactly on which in which area, which place of the land in a field, a specific type of fertilizer is necessary. So it can really it can bring precision farming to a next level. Later on today, you will also have the opportunity to listen to the pitch of Chiara Guidi. I don't know, well, see her there in the back. She will do the pitch in front of the investors jury. So what is very nice there is that what we also can work on is designer proteins. These designer proteins, they can replace antibiotics, for example. These designer proteins can be effective in agriculture from the health, but also for plants. So you will hear a very interesting story later on. I will not go into detail at this moment, because we have other speakers, of course, we need to listen to. But please contact her later on. So thank you very much for listening to my challenges. I hope we will have an interactive discussion later on. Thank you also for the translators, because it's difficult for me to speak French.
Thank you, Alde. On va passer la main à...
We will now go to Alexandre Termier. Hi, Alexandre. Thank you for being here. So you are professor at University of Rennes and you are co-author of the white paper Agriculture and Digital. Digital is a good thing because it is a hot topic today. And my question is to know, why is digital a pillar of this agricultural revolution and something that is absolutely crucial? Well, thank you for the introduction, and I will not be honest because since I'm an IT specialist, I will say obviously digital is essential for the agricultural revolution, but that will not be too much of a step forward because I think it is a pillar in everything today, in the works that have already been presented for fungi, for example. There were probably data that were collected. I'm just looking to make sure that I'm not mistaken, with experiences and models. So yes, that's quite obvious actually today. I will just share quickly a QR code so that you can have a look at the white paper while I make my presentation. So since my slides do not answer the question that was asked, I will try to answer it orally. So the digital world is a pillar for a very easy reason. Until now, data that was collected were quite weak. And so around 100 years ago, the farmer had good knowledge of their fields, but they had data that was not necessarily available to the others, but farmers were able to make a model of their farm and to just use that. But now we have problems that are harder to solve than 100 years ago because we have various conditions to face. And in addition, there's more pressure to feed people because there are more people to feed. And then the climate is changing as well, probably more than it changed 100 years ago. So things are more complicated today. And since we want to understand more things at a higher scale, we need more data. And we need the help of methods that will be able to build models based on this data and to give us answers. So in the various presentations, you've heard it already, we want to produce more in a more sustainable way while being sober. So we just want everything at the same time. And obviously, that's not easy, and that will not be easy. And to give you a quick example, well, it's very easy to say that on a panel and saying, okay, everything will be fine, or to say that in the EP. But I will give you a quick example that you probably know very well. You are preparing your holiday in Biarritz in the south of France, and you are going on Booking, for example, and you will search only for the hotels with a rating of 8 out of 10. And you have two criteria: the room price and the distance to the beach. So those are two important criteria for you. In your opinion, is the least expensive hotel closer to the beach? Well, no. There's a gap between the price and the beach distance, because sometimes you are very far away from Biarritz, from the city center, but it's very cheap. But if you are very close to the beach, then it will be more expensive. And if you look at the space here with all those hotels, you can take the limits of the hotels that are cheap but far away from the beach, or closer to the beach but more expensive, you have a form here that is not magical, that will not be exactly where you want it to be. And so the more data you collect, the more you will be able to see in a very complex space, way more complex than what I've just showed you, the various forms that appear and where you want to go. So if you add dimensions and say that you want it to be efficient to produce this type of protein, if you want it to be sober, so when you have more and more dimensions, 2 is okay, 3 is okay, but it might not be easy for everyone. 4 dimensions, it will be a more complicated form that we'll be moving to, and those we are interested in are 10 to 12 dimension figures. So you probably know that to add dots in these figures, you will need to collect a lot of data. But if you want to collect a lot of data, you will also need a lot of sensors that are very costly and that use up a lot of energy. So this is to help you understand the space of the solutions that we have in front of us. And to do that, we will need to collect more data, which will allow us to choose the direction we want to go in. And then if I talk about a technical side of things, agricultural data is horrible for us as IT experts because it looks clean, but it's usually a mess because we have a temperature sensor on the cow. Okay, great. For us, it's easy. But sometimes the cow drinks, and so the sensor will be colder, and the data is not reliable. So we have to correct the data that we collected. Okay, great. And then the cow was further away from the sensor, from the data collector. So the data is not always very reliable. We have to manage and handle uncertain data. We need to label the data as well. And model learning, it's not magical. You need to tell the model what you want to have. And data labeling is done by humans, so it takes money, it takes time, and if you don't do it properly, you will have lost your time and your money. So you need to label the animals and then their behaviors, what they eat, what they do. And obviously those who do that are trainees and interns because they are the ones who can do that. They are able to see what the cows are eating and doing. Each intern will use a different label, a different text. For example, one will say the pig ate that quantity of food, and then the other will write ingestion. Okay, great. And that's a true example. The interns do their job, but if you do not give them very specific instructions, well, it cannot work. And since they are different people as well, they are biased in some way. So things that seem easy and that you can think can be solved by machine learning, well, it's not that simple. There are 2 other things that I would like to talk about. The first is, how do you call that? We have heard about the link between farmers and consumers through data. This is what we call data traceability. And that's highly feasible. Well, it's kind of boring in the agricultural sector because you have something very beautiful, data. When you generate data, a piece of data, it is available forever. And if you want to do traceability, it is linked to materials that will disappear and that will also change their existing state. So that's not easy. That's another issue with traceability, and you also need to avoid alteration by third parties or mistakes. So that's complicated, but there's a lot to do on that front. And we are thinking of creating many tools to help farmers and consultants, and we need to find a way so that the results are communicated in a useful and understandable way to everyone. So there is a lot of work with social scientists who are going to work on the acceptability of models and on communication between the stakeholders to help everyone understand what is going on. And since I forgot the last item I wanted to talk about, then I am done here. Thank you very much. We will now give the mic to Erwan. Hi, Erwan. Thank you for being here. So he's a senior lecturer and researcher at INRAE, and he's also a professor at AgriTech. Okay, so I will quickly go over this because, okay, so my name is Personne, which in French means nobody. And I will present to you where I work in a few words. And the words that you see the most is the word transition. Well, the challenges have already presented by my colleagues: climate change, food insecurity, food sovereignty, all of that. So I'm not the scientific director of AgriTech, but I will try to speak on his behalf. And here I present the keywords of the Institute. So you have the 5 thematic pillars of our university, and there you can see at least 3 time transition. And for me, it means that you get to know the present and transition from it to the future without necessarily being in the future as of now. So the idea is to imagine the future and the transition to go from present to future. And it's important to keep that in mind, because the important is to work with present stakeholders to support them. And then the second word here is to really accompany, to support. And for me, that's very important. We need to support transition, but we also need to promote the connection between researchers and the stakeholders, be them farmers or consumers. So this is a general presentation of the university I work in. I'm going to give you 3 examples of activities carried out at the university, because it is quite hard to show everything that we do. So I'm going to show you 3. First of all, we work in the field of sensors. So we have the ROSA sensor. So I was lucky enough to have a personal investment. It's a very complicated sensor that can only be used by researchers. It allows to identify gas flows between the ecosystem and the atmosphere. And so it's very complicated. There are many things everywhere, but it allows us to understand for NH3, for ammonia, what are the flows between the surface and the atmosphere. And that can only be done by researchers, generally speaking. But we have also developed another system, and we hope that it can be used by technical institutes or air surveillance bodies. So we have sensors, labels, with labels with a switch that you can open or close so that you can really measure the air quality. So those are existing or new sensors that allow you to be smarter, to understand what is going on. The other example, and I'm less competent on this one, is the merging that is done between geomatics and modeling. So, for example, we invest on drones. So the university is working on drones to understand the components of soils, soil heterogeneity. So you have graphs, for example. You have a drone that will examine what is happening on the surface, the temperature, and other elements. And then you have a modeling to really cross the information of the sensor and the information of geomatics and the information of the modeling. So at the moment, this is what you can see. You have infography of the soil components. There's another example also to make your life easier to see the growth and the yielding of agricultural parcel over time. With drones, we don't have to go take samples everywhere. We can access information that will help us know the average height of the field and the heterogeneity of the soil to predict the evolution and the growth of the crops. So that's also another way to make your task easier. What we also do at the university is that we try to transfer this knowledge, this information to our students. Well, the idea is not that students learn to use drones, but rather learn to interpret the information given to us by the drones. And the last element that I wanted to present to you is that we have research sponsor programs that allow us to really merge the digital side of things and agriculture. So that was the third element. I'm not going to give you all the details that are on the slide, but the idea is to make all the stakeholders work together and to really connect research with the agricultural sector. There's a colleague of mine who will talk about the very concrete things that we are doing on a farm, so in a farm in the Parisian region. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you very much, Erwan. And to conclude, we will give the floor to Jacques Wéry, who is the Director of Research Strategy and Partnerships at the Institute Agro. Good morning, Jacques. I think you will also talk about transitions such as Erwan, and it will be interesting to have your opinion on this.
Good morning to you all. So I will talk about Institut Agro and touch maybe on something that we haven't talked about a lot, interaction and synergies between education, research, innovation, and I will show you some examples on the basis of our institutes. So we have a higher education and research facility centered on food, agriculture, environment, and landscape. And it is quite recent because it is the result of the fusion of 3 engineering schools, Montpellier, Dijon, and Rennes-Angers. So we are still creating this new facility. So we are bringing all of our strength together. We are also bringing all of our network partnerships together. So one characteristic is that we are close to the land and the territories thanks to those 3 schools. 2 of those are older than a couple of centuries, so they show deep history and a long history with the territories. And we also have a strong link with all the technical agricultural schools in France. If you take a look at our slogan, we want to train, innovate, and transform. And so we had to choose between innovation and transformation. We discussed about that a lot with our farmers partners. And I believe that it is necessary today to not say what we should do tomorrow, but we want to identify the directions in which we want to walk. And for France, we have a special reality, and we want to commit ourselves through our various activities, and we want to transform as necessary the agricultural sector in today's world, impacted by the climate change and because of the loss of biodiversity. And I believe that the CO2 issue brought biodiversity to the back front, but we should not forget about it. So our school wants to have an international dimension thanks to student exchange programs, thanks to partnerships between our researchers, professors. We also have contacts with a lot of universities from Belgium. Probably we could multiply those partnerships, and we talked about that with colleagues. There are more things to do so that our students from France and Belgium go and learn together in the fields. So we need to work on that. And at the European level, we are in the Réseau Health, and we want to develop a European university around food, agriculture, environment, and landscape. So in an engineering school, it's a bit particular because engineers are at the core of our history. We train about 2,800 engineers in various specialties, and those specialties very often answers specific needs. So one on biotic, one on grapes, one is on horticulture, one is on landscape, for landscape architects. And we really try to have engineer trainings that match the economic needs. PhDs, that's the second education pillar in our facility. And I believe when we talk about innovation, it is necessary to have well-trained engineers who have a scientific basis, and they also need to know about research and innovation. They also need to know the boundaries also, so as to identify the needs. And so we need PhD students who are involved in these transformation products. And next to that, we have various types of degrees, which are the results of partnerships together with technical secondary schools. And we also have master's partnerships, so partnerships with universities. So this whole system is very hard to manage. We are quite a small structure compared to the big universities that are represented here. But I believe this is a good exchange for flexibility. So we need to find a good balance. We also try to create synergies, so training, research. We want to support the technical, agricultural higher schools, secondary schools. So we help public and private schools in France and abroad, and we help them transforming their education programs. So we try to have them focus on transition. We also talk about their role when it comes to land research. We talked about living labs. There are a lot of land living labs being created in France, and the agricultural secondary schools have a major role to play in that. And this whole momentum is being created thanks to our involvement in innovation and in sustainable development, thanks to the help of the collectivities. On the research, we chose to only have partnerships with national bodies. We have more than 30 what we call UMRs, so joint research units, with INRA or with others. We also have 16 partnership positions, so 10 years. And I believe that those 10 years are essential to create spaces in which the students can learn by doing and by working on those issues that are also arising on the professional, in the professional life. So we are asking for financial funding, but we also want to hear what are the relevant questions so as to be efficient. I am not going to go into details into the whole ecosystem of our facility, but I believe that this is what made it possible for small structures to come together, and thanks to public-private partnerships, they can also play a big role in the transformation of agricultural and food systems. And maybe one thing I can mention about that, I believe that thanks to our trainings, but also thanks to the specializations and specialties in which the research professors are working, we are unique, and so we work on issues because we identify the needs of a specific sector, or we identify the needs of a piece of land, or we are working on issues linked to the production distribution and the models linked to that. And I believe that is also primordial because sometimes we feel that AgriTech innovations is only linked to the sector. So we are going to talk about biocontrol. However, behind that, for that biocontrol to be useful, we need to be able to articulate that with like plant species, for example, who better react to that biocontrol measures. And we need systems that can also make the whole system more useful and efficient. And so we need to have several approaches. So sector-based, but also land-based, region-based. And I believe this is necessary and will help us make AgriTech transformation more sustainable and go beyond what we are or what has been done. So what we heard until now always talks about combination with innovations. And something else? We are an engineer school, but we are also part of the university world, part of the research world. And depending on what our researchers are working on, we can touch upon a lot of dimensions. And there is a multidisciplinary approach. On the right, what you can see, how can we do this? We can do this because we have partnerships with research bodies, but also with technical institutes. And we also have special systems, so like the joint research units, which are partnerships among education systems in France. And we have technical institute partnerships, and they have quite an impact on the technology readiness level and the progress made on that. And next to that, we also have more and more partnerships with regions where the issues are linked to how to work together with the various stakeholders in a region. So I believe I will stop here. But maybe as a conclusion, I believe that a school like ours is an integral part of AgriTech, digital, biocontrol, data. But next to that, we also have a very systemic approach of innovation. Thank you very much, Jacques. Alexandre, maybe do you remember what you wanted to talk about earlier in your speech? No? All right. I would like to thank you all for your presentations. We now have a clear idea of the stakes of AgriTech applications. We have 20 minutes left, and I would like to open the debate. Maybe we can talk about transition and research, And more specifically, do you believe that research can help decision makers, public and private, and can help them speed up the transition? And so use research in AgriTech to speed that up. Thank you.
Alors merci de démarrer sur...
Thank you very much. Thank you to start with this idea of transition, because I believe that behind transitions, and it was said earlier, we need a vision, we need an ambition, we need to know which direction we want to go to. So we are always a bit in transition, but we need to anticipate where we want to land. And we need to identify what is important for us. So when we talk about zero pesticide, what does that mean? What is the deadline? What are we going to research? So as to avoid the use or the necessity for pesticides. When it comes to husbandry, can we actually, is it realistic to say zero emission for animal breeding? So nowadays, a lot is done in genomic selection. We were talking about cows. We are working on genetic diversity improvement. And so we are creating a certain amount of practices so as to avoid consanguinity. So what would be interesting is to talk about where we want to land. And I remember what my IT specialist said: data are complex. We need to collect them. We need to mine them. We need to interpret them. And so sometimes it's easy to say but hard to implement. However, it is still essential when we do research. We really need to keep our objective in mind so as to unlock the doors and to meet the challenges. And we need what is happening on the field. And what was said earlier, in all labs, we can find beautiful data that are very hard to interpret or implement, but we need solutions on the ground to find solutions on the ground. And those solutions need to be found soon enough so as to be industrialized. And when we think about research in transition, we really need to keep our objectives in mind. So I have a bit of experience with decision makers, public or private, and they need two things. So there is the proof of concept. So we can do this, we can go there. We need to demonstrate it's possible, and that strengthens the role of research and education facilities because they can invest or conduct experimentations. There are a lot of examples. We saw some yesterday, but it is the case all over Europe. In INRAE, for example, there are lots of experimentations. And today, experimentations are used to show what can be done in a farm. And so we need to demonstrate, we need to bring proof of concept, and then you need to quantify. So beyond that single example, how can we scale that up? And today, I believe that very often there's a bit of a shortcoming. So we're not always able to demonstrate and to prove that transformation is possible. We're not always able to say how much it's going to cost. So I'm not saying there are no research being conducted on the subject, but I believe we should invest more in that. And of course, it needs to be multidisciplinary and cross-border because we need to use the right data and use the right methods to demonstrate and also highlight which paths we can take. And then in the end, of course, the policymaker is going to make the decision. So when we talk with decision makers, we always know they always want an answer by tomorrow or by yesterday. And so for researchers, like you can get an answer sometimes 40 or 50 years later. So one of the difficulty or what we are seeing today is that everything is speeding up. Even the transition, it is going a little faster than what we would have liked. And so there will be difficulties. First of all, we need to be more pragmatic, and the Living Lab might be an answer. So it is an attempt to bring an answer sooner, even when the answer is not perfect. That's another issue. We always want to bring a perfect solution that can be applied everywhere, but that is not the case. And so I believe we do need to speed up the transfer of what we have researched. And then we need to create the most resilient systems possible. So we talk about climate change. We are imagining what will happen in 50 years, but actually in our daily lives, we need to have new systems that can be resilient to the climate change impacts and consequences. And we are experiencing today situations that we have never seen in 30 years. And so we need to have the ability to offer solutions that nonetheless are flexible and resilient. And it is very hard to do when the research is still in its early stages, when we really want to understand what is going on or what are the underlying structure of an ecosystem. So there's a big gap between the researcher and the politician. So that's it. Two things. So there's a cost of speeding up. I understand the need, but I believe that COVID showed us that asking researchers to talk fast on TV stages was a mistake. And we were talking about our objectives and where we want to land. And fast transitions. I believe there was an experiment conducted. I don't really remember. I think it was an FAO and report or maybe another in France about creating simulation scenarios. We need to feed a large population. How are we going to do that in a sustainable way? And in the French report, 5 scenarios were drafted and only 2 were working. An extremely ecological scenario or idea, really going to the sustainable angle. And the other one went to extreme industrialization because that's what's efficiency. And we all eat. And it's not very ecological. And all the intermediary ideas were non-viable. So that's an example. Okay, we can go fast, but it's not always very efficient.
Original question: can researchers help politicians? No doubt, yes. However, do they want our help? I think that's a second question. I'm going to tell you maybe something of my own experience. Some 10 years ago, I was a lobbyer at the European institutions in Brussels, specifically working on genetically modified organisms. As a scientist, and we know, and also with the safety dossiers that we generate, we know that these plants are perfectly safe. Every American is eating them, so every animal is eating them. So we know that they are safe. And they also pass through the safety part of the approval procedure. Nevertheless, none of these products have been approved yet. They are not in cultivation yet. I say yet, but I don't know if it is ever going to happen. There is a little bit of cultivation in Spain, but that's really limited. So, but coming back to this example, with biotechnology, we can solve a lot of problems. But the politicians, driven by certain types of communities, do not want to have this solution. And I think this is a very important aspect where we researchers can still learn from. We know that we have to go into dialogue, that everybody they need to want this solution. So that's not about just presenting what we all have, because we can do all wonderful things. We know that, and we publish them in our academic journals, and we know that we can step forward, that we can take major steps forward. But are our communities already ready for them? And I think that's the second question, which is really important.
Alors, qu'est-ce que je vais dire d'un...
What other smart comment could I add to everything that has been said? So I believe that we really need to work on communication between researchers and civil society. On the quality of data, the researcher, and I am a researcher at heart, he will try to improve all the equipment so as to achieve maximum precision. And society needs to know is that a good solution or not. He's not going to be concerned about the precision level. So we need to have those two co-live together. And the researcher needs to be absolutely certain that his solution is workable. And society needs to know where it wants to go. And if they don't communicate, it's going to end up in a disaster, because you will have the researcher who will keep on improving the equipment, but society needs to make choices and might end up making the wrong choices because it's not convinced. So the communication between students who are going to be researchers and engineers, that is nice and well. But personally, I'm very happy to often be in contact with private companies that tell me, I just need an answer to this question. And I just need a workable solution. And that brings us back down to earth. And so we need a sober communication. So yes, we need funding, we need staff, we need time, but we need to provide what is needed. And we need to create those new solutions. We need to guarantee that our planet is going to survive. We need a living world. We are lucky we are in France or in Belgium, but Europeans are not the only Earth inhabitants, and we need to take that all into account. And we also need to approach it from a global level. Thank you very much. That brings us back to what Jacques was saying, the necessity to better understand the how compared to the why. Yes, we can be surprised today. I believe there is a consensus as to why we need to change and where we need to go. Sometimes it's presented in various ways, but even if you look at the most extreme positions, there is a kind of consensus as to that things need to change, because we also need to regenerate what we've lost in biodiversity and nutrient component in the soil. So we need to stop maybe thinking about why all the time. So today, there's not a lot of investment on, be it in the research, in the agricultural council, or at the company levels. There's not a lot of investments thinking how to involve the people and how to work together in that same direction. And of course, we know that's the core principle. There will not be one single solution. There are lots of factors to take into account. So the question is more, how can we develop tools and advising tools to really implement the various solutions? And I think it's a more important question than really knowing where we go, because the solutions and the problems are all varied. And we also need to work on innovation approaches. We heard about it several times. We saw some examples of companies who are working on the best adapted solution to each problem. And instead of only producing or creating one product that is supposedly one single solution or one size fit for all. Please let me add, our responsibility as a scientific and research institute representative or innovation center representative, we need to use scientific data, and we need to use those to convince policymakers whose agenda is different from ours, because they're thinking short-term, and for us, short-term is not compatible with deep changes. And those are needed. And there is a sense of urgency on the climate, and we know that we need to act in the years to come. So time is running out, also in research. And we cannot just act as if we still had 20 years to meet the climate challenge. The climate emergency and urgency is there. We are talking about the 4 degrees that we need to adapt ourselves, whereas a few weeks ago it was still 2 degrees. So we can see there's a kind of renunciation or letting go, and we should not. And I would like to take the example of INRAE, where I work. We are being tasked to bring food for thought to the public bodies. We are financed by the Ministry of Research and Ministry of Agriculture. There are some laws that are existing, like the new law on agricultural orientation. What should we do? How should we organize ourselves? So the research bodies are involved together with other stakeholders to contribute to this decision-making and choosing the direction where we want to go. And so let's not mix or get confused about the various jobs. The policy or the decision maker makes decisions, and we are bringing knowledge. And we would be happy for the political world to know a little bit more about science. However, yeah, that's how it is. And so we can see that both worlds do talk with each other, but they're not really talking openly about the deepest issues. And we have no choice. We need to work together to work with the politics. And there's work by Charbonnier that shows us that the way we're going to live our freedoms will be conditioned by resource access. And we thought we believed for a lot of time that resources were infinite, but that is not the case. And so the need to share resources will restrict freedoms of the rich and the less rich people. And so we should keep in mind the need to communicate with the political world, and we need to transfer knowledge, to show them knowledge. We need to fight fake news and other conspiracy theories. We need to establish a link with society at every level, entrepreneurs and academics and other students that we want to encourage going towards science. And we also want incitative measures to be created. They should be calibrated to the degree of change that we wish to see for farmers, for example. And behind that, as researchers, we have a big responsibility. We need to produce the best possible science to communicate it in the best way possible. And we need to diversify the way we publish our results. There are a lot of ways to communicate beyond scientific journals. And the new partnerships, I believe, are key for the future of agriculture.
Dernière petite chose à ajouter.
Last element to add? No? Okay, so better communicate to better answer to the needs of AgriTech. I think it's a good conclusion. So thank you very much to all of you for taking part in this conference. Thank you for your insights, and thank you to the audience as well.